Hi everybody, today I'm going to tell you about chapter 8 of critical thinking. And in this chapter we are going to learn when is an argument a good one, and also when is it reasonable to accept a premise as true, and finally we are going to learn powerful strategies for refuting bad arguments. Let's begin with when is an argument a good one, and we are going to start with what good argument does not mean. A good argument does not mean agrees with my views. Such an attitude makes it impossible to learn from viewpoints that differ from one's own and is completely opposite to the spirit of critical thinking. And the other standard is good argument does not mean perceives arguments. Not all arguments are meant to persuade. Sometimes the arguer is just going through the motions, or thinking out loud, or giving example without any intention of persuading anybody. And also good argument does not mean well written or well spoken argument. And when it comes to what good argument does mean, a good argument is basically an argument in which two conditions are met. If all premises are true and the premises provide good reason to accept the conclusion, and we also learned in chapter 3 that a set of premises provides good reasons to accept a conclusion when the argument is either deductively valid or inductively strong, and thus a good argument fundamentally is an argument that either deductively strong and inductively cogent. And furthermore, in previous chapter we have learned that there are certain basic critical thinking standards that all good thinking and argumentation must meet, and the most important of these standards are clarity, precision, accuracy, relevance, consistency, logical correctness, completeness, and fairness. And when it comes to evaluating arguments, if we want to evaluate argument better, we have some general guidelines, and we should, when we evaluate argument, we should ask ourselves this question to make argumentation process better and more understanding, and we can think more critically. Firstly, we should say, are all premises true? And then, is the reasoning correct? It deductively valid and inductively strong. We should ask it to ourselves. And then, is there any logical fallacies? And is arguer express his or her points clearly or preciously? And also, are the premises relevant to the conclusion? And is the argument complete? And finally, we should say that, is the argument fair? And when it comes to when is it reasonable to accept a premise, the most general principle can be summed in the following: principle of rational acceptance. Generally speaking, it's reasonable to accept a claim if the claim does not conflict with personal experience that we have no good reason to doubt, and the claim does not conflict with background beliefs that we have not reason to doubt, and the claim comes from a credible source. Let's briefly discuss these three conditions. Sometimes people assert claims that conflict with our personal observation and experience. When this happens, it's usually best to trust our own experience. Thus, if your neighbor's Doberman is snarling, foaming at the mouth, and chewing on the tattered remnants of a mail carrier's bag, it's probably a good idea to trust your own eyes rather than your neighbor's assurance that the dog is as gentle as a kitten. And in the second reasonable to accept a premise is, does the claim conflict with our background beliefs? Sometimes a claim does not conflict with any of our personal observation or experience, but does conflict with certain background beliefs we hold. And In general, if a claim fits well with our background beliefs, it's reasonable for us to accept it. For example, the claim "it was hot in Las Vegas last 4th of July" is quite believable, given background information most of us share about midsummer weather condition in the Nevada desert. And when it comes to does the claim comes from a credible source, generally speaking, we should accept a claim on authority if it's come from a credible source that we have no good reason to doubt. Good reasons to doubt the credibility of source may include: the source is not genuine expert or authority, the source is speaking outside his or her area of expertise, the source is biased or has some other motive to lie or mislead, the accuracy of the source's personal observations or experience is questionable, the source is contained a source that is generally unreliable, the source has not been cited correctly or has been quoted out of the context, the issue is one that cannot be settled by expert opinion, and the claim made by the source is highly improbable on its face. And when it comes to refuting arguments, there are two ways in which an argument can be refuted. The first is show that a premise or a critical group of premises is false or dubious. Here is a good example. All presidents live in the White House. Paris Hilton is president, so Paris Hilton lives in White House. The second premise is false is enough to refute the argument. Because this premise is false and the argument fails to provide good reason to accept the conclusion. This is false, so the argument fails to provide good reason to accept the conclusion. And the second way to refute an argument is by showing that the reasoning is faulty. And the most important question to ask in assessing the logic of an argument are: if argument is deductive, does the conclusion follow necessarily from the premises? And the other question: are the premises relevant to the conclusion? And are the premises sufficient to support the conclusion? And here's an example to make it clear in your mind. Get high-speed internet access by satellite is fast, reliable, and won't tie up your phone lines. The AD for high-speed internet access fails to mention any cost associated with the purchasing high-speed service or the long-term commitments that are typically required. To sum up this chapter, in critical thinking, a good argument is an argument that satisfies the relevant critical thinking standards that apply in particular context. The most important critical thinking standards are accuracy, and there are, however, other critical thinking standards that should also be considered in evaluating arguments. These are clarity, precision, relevance, consistency, completeness, and fairness. In general, it is reasonable to accept an unsupported claim as true when the claim does not conflict with personal experience that we have no reason to doubt, and the claim does not conflict with background beliefs that we have no good reason to doubt, and the claim comes from a credible source. And to refute an argument is to defeat it, to show that the premises do not provide a good reason to accept the conclusion. And there are two ways to refute an argument. The first is show that a premise or critical group of premises is false or dubious, and show that the reasoning is bad, that the premises do not provide adequate logical support for the conclusion. Two effective strategies for showing that a premise is false are reducing to the absurd. Reducing to the absurd seeks to refute a claim by showing that the claim implies something that is obviously false or absurd. Refutation by counterexample attempts to show that general claim is false by producing one or more than counter examples. For example, claim of form all A's are B's or most A's are B's. And finally, we talked about key question we should ask in evaluating argument include the following. Are all premises true? And is the reasoning correct? Is the argument deductively valid or inductively strong? Does the arguer commit any logical fallacies? Does the arguer express his or her points clearly and precisely? Are the premises relevant to the conclusion? Are the arguer's claims logically consistent? Do any of the arguer's claims contradict other claims made in the argument? And is the argument complete? Is all relevant evidence taken into account? And is the argument fair? Is the arguer fair in his/her presentation of the evidence and treatment of opposing argument and views? And in the end, there is a good critical essays. I suggest that you should review these critical essays and match your information with the essay. Thank you for listening. That's all.